Welcome back, everyone, to Hearts of Iron 4 China Rework Kaiserreich thing. Now, as probably you've already seen, this is supposed to be a China Reworked explained kind of video. Now, let's actually go on observe mode. Now, why am I doing this? Well, there's been a few people that have requested it. And, well, I have done these kinds of things in the past, but without the actual, like, game to actually go in and show firsthand. Like, for example, I'm looking at the Qing Empire, I'm explaining the Qing Empire. Let's take a look at the focus tree ourselves through the game. So, yeah, I guess it's time to do so. Anyway, so... Now, China in 1946 apparently is incredibly divided. And, it's also ridiculously confusing, so let's kind of dive right in. Now, at the beginning of the game, all of China, well, all of China, most of China within the Great Wall, this dividing line between the Qing and the Fengtian government, which is this northeastern faction where Manchukuo normally is in Hearts of Iron 4, is basically the Great Wall. Like, it's not exactly that, but it's mostly that. And, well, all of China within it is supposedly under the domain of the Qing Empire, which is the last imperial dynasty of China, which in real life ended in 1911, with the First Republic of China being proclaimed on the New Year's of 1912. And in the Kaiserreich universe, the Qing Empire was restored by German intervention in the basically late 1920s, after an event called the Northern Expedition, which failed. Now, the Northern Expedition in real life was the attempt by the Chinese nationalists based in the south to overthrow the so-called Northern warlords of the warlord era, many of whom are surviving in Kaiserreich to a much greater position of power than they did in real life in 1946. And who are pretty much the object of this video. And in real life this succeeded and led to Chiang Kai-shek taking power in Nanjing, forming sort of the real Republican period of China from 1927 to 1937, called the Nanjing Decade, and which is represented in Hearts of Iron 4 by Nationalist China, which is this big yellow blob that you see at the beginning. With a couple of different warlord states that are represented as independent, such as the Ma's, called the Xibei Sanma or Xibei Sanma. I'll just be interswitching the correct pronunciation with the pronunciation that I think most people are familiar with. Xinjiang, which is called Xinjiang here. Tibet, which is obviously not a warlord state, but kind of like an ethnic entity. And Yunnan. But in real, and obviously Shaanxi or Shaanxi, obviously in normal Hearts of Iron 4 you also have over here the Chinese communists, but they don't exist in this timeline, at least not in the form that you'd expect. Now, these states are the remnants of the warlords, which is what mostly we're going to be dealing with today, and so we must kind of understand who the fuck these people are. Now, you can see that most of these guys are called cliques. Now, a clique is kind of like a faction. For those who don't speak you know, native English, it's kind of a weird word. I had to learn it too. In fact, the name in Chinese would be Pai for these guys, like Sichuan Pai, Sichuan faction. Literally just means faction. And you can see that most of these guys, Xinjiang, Sichuan, Yunnan, these are names of provinces, of the corresponding provinces where they're geographically coming from. Shandong, Shaanxi. Later on, a few of the warlords within the League of Eight Provinces will have provincial names. But that is because these sort of warlord leaders basically were military people who came to prominence holding civilian governorships within provinces. Now, this was because when the Chinese, the last empire, the Qing dynasty, collapsed, basically the Chinese political system had been collapsing since the 1850s. And it was in a gradual decline for 60 years where sort of political and military power was fusing together much more than it was common in the imperial Chinese order, traditional order. And, well, before you had that, the civilian bureaucracy and the military were very, very much separate. They had separate sort of entry ways, separate examinations, separate power structures. They even had separate ministries way before the concept of ministry was invented in Europe. And, well, eventually, the supremacy that the civilian leadership had over the military was eroded during the Qing Empire because of the sort of disruptive changes that came with Western, especially British, but also French, German, American, and Russian, but later Japanese arrivals at the coast of China, which kind of threw the whole traditional order into disarray and, well, paved the way for the fragmentation of power of a state that could no longer hold all of its constituents together. This massive Chinese empire, which stretched pretty much like this. Well, also pretty much had all of this, except the parts of Japan that you see. This massive state could not cope anymore and sort of fragmented. And obviously the sort of individual power blocks that formed out of it were led by the people with the most immediate form of power, which is violence, which is basically, you know, the background of it. So when the empire falls in 1911, it is not because like the revolutionaries managed to convince the population to rise up, although they do that too. It's mostly because they convinced the military to rise up, and especially because the leader of the military, a guy called Yuan Shikai, actually type, look at the bottom right, I'm typing a name, a guy called Yuan Shikai, who is sort of the primary commander of the Imperial Army, the most prominent one in Beijing, switches sides and, you know, in return for being declared president of the new Republic of China, he's gonna, you know, force the overthrow of this guy called Puyi, who at the time was like 6 years old. Famous movie about this is Last Emperor. Now, a bunch of stuff happens afterwards. Yuan Shikai tries to declare himself emperor, he fails, and he is overthrown by the first instance of warlordism, although many argue that Yuan Shikai himself was the first warlord, which is Yunnan. Now, Yunnan, in the sort of dying years of the Chinese Empire, had taken on a new importance because this colony in Indochina, which in Kaiserreich is German, but in real life obviously was French, had the connection, which is the Yunnan Railroad, which I believe is represented here. They have German control, but actually they don't seem to have it. There was a railroad essentially between Kunming, which is the capital of Yunnan, and Hanoi. And basically through there a lot of French influence came, and also through Burma a lot of British influence came, which sort of continued the legacy of Chinese penetration of China by Western powers, which elsewhere in China had only been able to reach sort of the treaty ports, which were these concessions that are, well, the sort of grandson of these is the legation cities, international areas within Chinese ports and coastal cities, but didn't really reach that much inland, except with railroads, but that's another deal. In Yunnan, basically through that wave of trade with the West and you know, rise of innovation, there was the establishment of an important military academy to which many nationalist youth flocked. So when the empire was overthrown, basically a bunch of people went to Yunnan to become military, sort of the new leaders of the military of this new state. And well, the people that went there generally were more infatuated with the new Republican ideals rather than the old traditional sort of Chinese ideologies. And when Yuan Shikai tried to declare himself emperor, the first people to rise up in revolt were the people from Yunnan, which was the beginning of the Yunnan clique, which was the first warlord clique. And the guy who began that was a man named Cai E, this person's art of war over there, Cai E. Or C-A-I-E, and his student was Tang Jiao. So that's basically the background behind all of this. Now, at some point, the Chinese nationalists were sort of sidelined, and the government in Beijing was taken over not by civilian revolutionaries, but by, again, a whole bunch of people like the Yunnan clique, essentially men from military background who variously supported or opposed the Republican cause or the nationalist cause, and variously sort of became corrupt individuals of their own. Now, they're often portrayed as only the corrupt people, but they're also, again, regionalists, because the formation of these regional power blocks after the fall of the Qing Empire essentially meant that a lot of very, very influential people within single provinces were pushing for a more equitable arrangement between their provinces and Beijing itself, or Nanjing in case the capital switched. So that's basically the background behind the fragmentation of China in all these factions, which is pretty standard for us, for a country that's going through turmoil and civil war, but which was particularly pronounced in China because these people are aimed to be fucked around. Like if we take a look at Sichuan click over here, which is, to be fair, one of the biggest ones, but these guys have got 200,000 people under their service, even though they're they're basically just up-jumped criminals, and they have an army of 200,000 people. Feng Tian, whose leader is literally an old, he began as a bandit. He's got a modern army of relatively modern army of 190,000. So the fact that these strongmen were able to amass such huge armed forces because of, this being China and there being lots of resources to sort of plunder in a way and utilize to build up armed forces, meant that these warlord factions took on basically regional and global implications as well, with different powers. This was basically at the end of the First World War too, like the period of fragmentation from the declaration of the New Republic in 1912 to the beginning of the warlord era, proper, is 1916, which is when Yuan Shikai dies. Then the whole country fragments. And so basically, when these wars really start to get going, a bunch of countries have just finished fighting World War I, and they have a bunch of surplus guns that they don't particularly need. And so if there's people in China with tons of gold, tons of, relatively valuable trade goods, handicraft products, crops, opium, all these kinds of things, well, they're going to sell them the guns. And so, for example, different powers aligned with different warlords. For example, obviously Yunnan, who had a direct supply line to France, bought guns from France, and airplanes too. The Fengtian, the people in Manchuria, bought from Japan. The Zhili, who are the people behind Qing in the Kaiserreich, bought from Germany and Italy, and so on and so forth. Now, basically, in real life, eventually the nationalists are able to sort of build up their strength in the south and eventually come north. In Kaiserreich, this doesn't happen because they also step on the Germans' interests, and the Germans help fuck them up. And the Germans, being kind of dumb, decide that, seems like this whole Republican shtick didn't work out. Let's restore the empire, because that is exactly what, is supposed to be done. Now, in real life, the Japanese kind of do that, but they only restore the empire in Manchuria, creating this new state of Manchukuo, or the Manchurian state, which basically nobody takes seriously except Japan itself. Even the Germans, who become allies of the Japanese, don't really recognize Manchukuo for a bunch of time, and continue sending aid to nationalist China, with whom they had a bigger relationship. So the fact that they were able to restore the emperor in Beijing itself, the last emperor, has a little bit more legitimacy, and through the intricacies of and the magic of lore, basically the Qing Empire survives, even though it's not supposed to. Now, what really makes this empire survive is not particularly great monarchist sentiment or particularly great skill and organization and building an army for the empire itself and the emperor. The army, which is called Guofangjun, the Country Protection Army, is actually controlled by a faction of military people called the Zhili clique, Now let's see if we can find the main man of these, Wu Peifu, this guy. This guy basically in the 20s was kind of like the great sort of military man in China to really fear. Now, there was a bunch of wars, both in real life and in the Kaiserreich lore, between all these different warlords. Especially known were the Zhili-Fengtian Wars. Now, Zhili are called this because the area which today in China is known as Hebei, basically, which is this part, the part with Beijing, and Henan, which here it's not shown, but it's basically this part. Hebei means north of the river. The river is the Yellow River, so basically it's everything in north of China, north of the Yellow River, and in the North China Plain. And Henan is the plain south of the river, this one. Used to be known as Zhili in imperial times, which is written like this. And let's see if we can find it anywhere. Written as Zhili, yeah, like Zhili Engineer Corps, this word right here. And basically, yeah, future of the Zhili clique. Basically, they were dominated by this guy called Wu Peifu, who was, again, this like sort of larger-than-life figure. He was a Confucian scholar, kind of. So he had this very, very cultivated image. He was an amazing general who could inspire his troops and all that, blah, 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 blah. Sort of a character, kind of almost a character out of, you know, a traditional novel, like the Three Kingdoms novel, the romance. And so he was this very charismatic figure that could unite a bunch of people behind him. However, this period was also fraught with, obviously, a lot of backstabbing, political intrigue, sort of what we'd call it today, Game of Thrones. And eventually he was, his power base was overthrown. And, well, first by Fengtian, and then later by Shanxi, and then, you know, the nationalist came. But in this timeline, he is able to sort of rally a bunch of leaders behind Puyi and keep control of a fair amount of North China under the direct sort of rule of the empire. And basically their whole shtick is sort of surviving, because basically while the whole country is supposed to be theirs, especially the southern portion under the League of Eight Provinces is not really doing so hot. And all the other parts of China are really starting to feel, you know, the sort of biting hits of disintegration coming in. And the only relatively peaceful and stable parts are Shanxi, which is perfect. It's basically the Switzerland of the Chinese warlords, so they don't really get involved with the affairs of anyone else at the beginning. And Fengtian, which is completely outside of the control of the government in Beijing, and it's under the you know, sort of feared domination of the aggressor, the Japanese. And so basically at the beginning they need to choose their direction, either trying to sort of placate the intellectuals who are very pro-Republican and very, very nationalist, their biggest gripe with a bunch of governments is that they're so-called race traders. They, you know, sell out the country to the foreigners with their weak, you know, sort of policies. Or placate the assembly, which the assembly is basically the Peking Commission, I believe, which is the German sort of lobby in Beijing. So either a pro-German path to sort of get the Germans involved in China ever more to balance out the Japanese, or a sort of pluralistic, we'll call it, pro-nationalist option. And this is revolving around the anti-concession movement, which is why I was mentioning the railroads earlier, because basically during this time, and also especially during the last days of the Qing Empire, the railroads that were starting to spring up around China were basically being constructed and bought up with foreign capital, because capital accumulation wasn't really a thing in China, not at least in a very, very effective way, enough to build railroads and concentrate the resources necessary to expand them. And this angered a bunch of intellectuals who were like, yeah, railroads. But at the same time, shit, they're foreigner railroads. So what we're doing basically is we're selling like the, you know, transportation hubs of the future China to people who are not exactly, you know, very, very concerned with our best interests. So that's basically the background of the anti-concession movement, which explodes, especially in Sichuan, but also other parts of the country, and explodes into the 1911 revolution, which overthrows the empire. So this new wave of anti-concessionism in 1936 in the Kaiserreich verse, what these people are thinking is, oh shit, the last time this happened, we got fucked. And so they're trying to prevent that. Now, obviously, the world has changed a lot since 1911, but it never hurts to be, you know, never hurts to be sort of, you could say, precautious. Now, because of the unrest in the south, this is what happens if Wu Peifu decides to intervene in favor of Anqing, or in favor of Nanjing, which is the League of Eight Provinces, which we'll get to in a bit. Now, Anqing is this Anhui province warlord, which basically throws their weight in favor of the concession movement, the anti-concession movement. And he's trying to rally up nationalist forces in an anti-corruption crusade, while Nanjing is sort of representing the old forces of the status quo. This is what happens if they are intervening at all. If they don't intervene, they basically say, okay, whatever, we had just lost control over the south of the country, and there is the possibility of either a coup to, quote-unquote, restore the Manchu, and basically this swaps out this focus tree for the Manchu restoration tree, which I've actually never seen, so I won't talk about. Now, basically what this means is that the people who are seeking to do this are seeking to restore the power of the emperor, much like how in Japan, the shogunate, which was the military dictatorship behind the emperorship, was restored in a wave of sort of both modernizing and nationalist sentiment, which later became the Meiji Restoration, which later led to Japan becoming a regional power. Basically the same thing with Puyi. It is also kind of echoing other restoration, quote-unquote, restoration attempts that were going on in the Qing Empire in the late years of the Qing Empire. Which also, well, we don't have time to get into that actually, so fuck that. Anyway, so the new constitution is if the coup fails and the Zhili clique are still around, but legal scholars under the Zhili supervision will start to promulgate a constitution. So this is basically another reformist path. Now, they have two leaders, either Wellington Koo, who is a diplomatic kind of guy. Now, a bunch of these guys actually have like sort of, well, a bunch of these, I say a bunch of these guys. A lot of the more academic personalities actually have quite a few like Western names. That is because a bunch of Chinese intellectuals at the time, especially at the end of the Qing Empire, but also in the years of the Republican period, was sent abroad to study, especially in Japan, but also in the Western United States and, you know, the great universities of the US, but also, for example, in France, which comes in to the more revolutionary side in Kaiserreich. Or the other option that they can go for is Hu Shi, who is one of the most well-known sort of Chinese writers. And this guy is really, really important in real life, but also pretty important here. Now, it's important to know that this guy is very liberal, like in his, well, maybe not very liberal, but definitely liberal enough in his political views. So this is a pretty harsh reformist path. And basically this leads into a republic, proclaiming the true Republic of China. Now, the flag that they have is a 5-stripe flag, which represents the 5 main ethnicities of China. And this is the flag that was in use during the so-called Beiyang period. Now, Beiyang is another term that generally means this area, so just don't pay attention. It means the northern seas. It comes from the Yellow Sea. And the Beiyang period of Chinese history is basically the early 20s. And that's what's basically known as the main period of the warlord era. So it's very much that kind of order that they're restoring. Basically, that's that. Now, the Qing Empire's, the rest of the Qing Empire tree is coming down and sort of, again, centralizing power as much as possible in the hands of Beijing. Eventually, they get to reclaim other parts of China that sort of went astray. And in the end, the great sort of event is the War of National Resistance, which is going to be when the Fengtian and the Japanese come in and try to kill you. And that's basically the Qing Empire right there. So either they sort of stay compliant and either have a coup or restore the Republic of the Warlords, or they have on the left-hand side a sort of reformist constitutionalist path, either pro-Western or specifically pro-German or pro-nationalist. And yeah, basically that also deals with how you modernize your army, but it's not really all that important right now. We've said enough about the military situation of China in the period. And yeah, basically that's the Qing. Now, their main rival in Kaiserreich at this point is the Fengtian government, which is headed by a guy called Zhang Zuolin, who I've already sort of mentioned off straight. Now, I'm pausing just to keep the League of Eight Provinces around because later on we're going to need to talk about them. Now, the Fengtian government itself is basically, I've already mentioned this guy used to be a bandit. And he's sort of the Zhang Zuolin, this guy is sort of the old marshal, as he's called also, is sort of the penultimate exemplification of the social mobility of warlordism. Basically, he starts off as this commander of just some band, right? Then a sort of world-shattering historic event happens, the Great Revolution comes in, and he rises up through his skill, basically. While at the same time, he's still kind of, like, he's illiterate, you know, at the start. So he's still got many of the problems of his upbringing. And later on, he sort of becomes known to be, well, kind of an interesting character that also shouldn't be trusted. Basically, he was kind of a treacherous son of a bitch. And again, he's also kind of the epitome of this warlord mentality, both in the people he recruits, such as Zhang Zongchang under him, and a bunch of other interesting bandit-like figures. The fact that he kind of sells himself out to the Japanese, who are in this period of time after the end of World War I, the Japanese really become the main villain in the Chinese public discourse. Compared to before, it had been the British, definitely, or maybe the Germans if you're from the areas that were colonized by the Germans, or maybe the French if you're in the areas where there's more French influence. The Japanese were always more seen as like kind of a model to learn from. Here we have this Asian country that had overcome its millennia-old, sort of isolation and backwardness and prejudice and superstition to become a global power. So, for example, the Chinese nationalists, the leader of the Chinese nationalists, Sun Yat-sen, for a while actually sort of was in exile, and instead of going to, like, I don't know, France, he went to Japan. Although he had been in Hawaii a bunch of time and was inspired by American political philosophy, he went to Japan because they were seen as sort of the leaders of this new rise of Asia in global affairs. Well, after the 1920s, this starts to become a bit more of a stigma, mostly because the Japanese, at this point, were really maturing as a global power. They had already fought a war with China over Korea in 1895 and had tried to occupy Port Arthur, which is this place, which was part of China, only to be denied by the Russians in 1895. Only to then later take Port Arthur again in 1905 when they fought and successfully defeated the Russians, which again inspired the Chinese, because it's like, oh, this Asian power, modernized in a few decades, and was able to defeat one of the greatest, armies in the world. But at the same time, it started to worry them because, oh shit, this is actually Chinese territory. When are you gonna give it back if you're really, such a great champion of Asian unity as you proclaim in your propaganda? This comes in even more in the 1920s after the First World War, and the sort of sphere of influence of other powers starts to falter in China. The Japanese replace them. And in real life, this culminates in 1929, which is when Zhang Zuolin sort of has outlived his usefulness to the Japanese, and they assassinate him. His son continues to rule the Fengtian clique, the Fengtian area, more closely aligns to the nationalists, and is then expelled in 1931, which is when the Japanese invade Manchuria and take it over and form Manchukuo. Now, in this timeline, the Japanese sort of political situation is very different. I actually have a video on that if you go up and look it up in my channel. And especially, and so they never assassinate Zhang Zuolin, he's still around. And his whole focus tree is all about balancing out, reaching out to the Japanese for aid and integrating into the greater co-prosperity sphere to improve the Manchurian economy, which is heavily dependent upon Japanese investment. Now, Manchuria in this time was pretty much the industrial heartland of China, thanks again to this massive Japanese investment. Basically it was the region where sort of new things were going on. There was also migration ongoing to Manchuria from basically massive migration, like millions of people were moving in from sort of overpopulated because of like agriculture, business land in North China, especially Shandong province, to here. So you have that. Basically this is the region that's sort of, on a roll. However, you're still dependent on the Japanese, and you have to balance that out with basically the claim that they are the leaders of the real Republic of China. Now, they are not part of the Qing Empire faction at the start. That is because they are the last bastion, as it may, of republicanism, even though it's pretty much the warlord fashion of republicanism, the Beiyang. As you can see, that star over there, that's their symbol, has those 5 colors. The 5 colors of the First Republic of China. Basically, their focus tree is all about, again, the collaboration with the Japanese in the economic side, while trying not to be too influenced by them on the political spectrum. And this can actually be seen by looking at their political system, where they have 4 main factions: the Zhang clique, which is basically just the immediate sort of cronies of Zhang Zuolin; the Recovery League, which are just a nationalist group. Let's check it out. At the start, a loose association of fallen generals, governors, and bureaucrats. Basically, what's keeping them all together is coming back from their exile to, the still relatively wild and only now developing Manchuria into the heartland of China. Then there's the Communications clique, which are a collection of railroad and telegraph barons. Basically, they are in favor of industrial development. And the Concordia Association, which are also an association of industrialists, but they're more connected to the Japanese, and especially the Mantetsu, which is the Japanese conglomerate which manages the South Manchurian Railway from Shenyang all the way to Yingkou, which is this port, and Port Arthur. Which is the, and then the railroad goes all the way up to Changchun and Harbin, where the railroad also connects to the Chinese Eastern Railroad, which cuts like this from, where is it, Chita over here to Vladivostok, which was a part of the Trans-Siberian Railroad, which the Japanese and the Russians fought over in 1905. So as you can see, all these geopolitical things are coming together. And Manchuria itself is an incredibly fascinating place to study, but we don't have time to go ahead and look at it. Now, the road to reclamation, they have a bunch of like propaganda stuff that they can do. And they have a legation council? What the fuck? I'm pretty sure that's not supposed to be there, which is hilarious. Now, basically, their last great act is to expel the Japanese officers, basically finally come off the yoke of the Japanese. And, well, at that point, you have to fight basically an independence war with the Japanese. This is supposed to be after you've reunited the whole of China in the Reclamation War. Now, once you start the Reclamation War, which is going to be over here in the road to Reclamation, you fight the Qing, right? And if you take Beijing, you take from Beijing to the Begonia Leaf. Now, the Begonia Leaf is the shape of China, kind of. Like this thing-ish. I don't know. I don't see it. But yeah, basically it's the reunification of China. You can either do a negotiation, sort of like a big reunification conference, which is quite interesting because it's also the plan of another guy that we're gonna take a look at very soon, and that's gonna lead to a federal China. A federal republic of China, while the other one is unification by subjugation. So, you know, the good old iron and blood, and that leads to the more correct, like Zhang Zuolin path that he would probably go for, considering that he was a crazy warlord. And there he also has like this sort of anti-Japanese action at the end, this anti-Japanese declaration of independence. Or he can also have a coup, and if that coup happens, he basically becomes sort of a real puppet of China. Anyway, of Japan, damn it. And that's basically the main rival of the Qing at the start. Now, the main collaborator of the Qing at the start, collaborated and also liability, is the country, quote-unquote country, entity known as the League of Eight Provinces. Now, the League of Eight Provinces is under the warlord called Sun Chuanfang, who is another one of these sort of pure backstabbing kind of guys from the Chinese warlord period, who in real life was basically just steamrolled incredibly hard by the KMT. First, he was getting steamrolled in the wars between the different warlords by this guy, Zhang Zongchang, who was advancing down from Shandong into Nanjing. He survives that basically because the bigger faction of Shandong, which was Fengtian, gets kind of destroyed. So he survives on borrowed time, and the nationalists then steamroll him because he's basically the first guy on their path to, you know, the reunification north. And this does not happen. He gets saved barely in this timeline, and he is the sort of main leader of the southern portion of China, 8 provinces. Now, the 8 provinces are Anhui, Jiangsu, which is, let's see if we can actually, no, but Jiangsu, which is this sort of name, which is this thing, yeah. Which includes most notably Shanghai and Nanjing. Then there is Fujian and Zhejiang provinces, which are these 2 provinces by the seaside. Let me write them for you. Zhejiang and Fujian, which are sort of more trade-focused areas, and also Guangdong and Guangxi, the 2 Guangs. Guangdong is Canton, basically. This part. Guangxi is this part. Let me write that. And then the other 2 provinces are Jiangxi, which is this thing, and Hunan, which is this thing, which is also where Mao Zedong is from in real life. Jiangxi is also where the Chinese communists had their first sort of big base of operations in China, along with Fujian, which comes into play when we look at the Chinese nationalists in this timeline. Now, the League of Eight Provinces is a loose association between, a loose sort of alliance, really, between warlords of these 8 provinces. Now, at the beginning, we already see that Chen Tiaoyuan and Anhui provinces secedes from the League because he wants to lead the nationalist anti-concession movement. And basically, this guy's whole tree revolves around either getting the support of Japan or getting the support of the Qing Empire. Now, if he gets the support of the Qing Empire, he can recreate a sort of smaller League of 8 provinces with 5 provinces under Beijing, and basically, again, uphold Chinese national honor or whatever. While if he stands with Japan, he creates the same league under Zhang Zuolin and the Republic instead of the Empire. But at the same time, he's having to deal with the problem of, you know, being this great whole nationalist champion, anti-corruption guy who sides with the most corrupt warlord. Well, maybe not the most corrupt warlord, but definitely one of the most warlordy warlords around. And the Japanese, who are the main foreign enemies of China. So basically, that's his problem. Now, if he's got this modifier called credibility. Actually, let's go to him. He's got this modifier called credibility, which he can increase, and which events can decrease, and choices in the focus tree influence. And well, basically, if his credibility is high, things go good. If his credibility is low, things don't go good. And he can do a bunch of interesting stuff to increase his credibility, which might piss off a bunch of people. Now, basically, his whole rule sort of relies upon momentum. He starts off with the righteous cause modifier, which gives him a bunch of glorious spirits. Actually, I am tagged as him. I don't particularly want to be tagged as him. Which gives him a glorious bunch of bonuses. And if he gets his credibility up, he's gonna get that even sort of greater. And as you can see at the beginning, he goes to war with Nanjing because he's like, well, we can't take this anymore. He sees his chance and goes in and strikes. Now, once this happens, the League of 8 Provinces is fucked, and they revert back to being the Nanjing clique of warlords. No more the Great Thing, just, you know, just another one of these factions vying for control. As you can see, there's a bunch of secessions that happen, and basically, the more Mr. Chen acquires, the more he can basically raise up followers and armies and credibility to his cause. However, if his if his momentum starts to dry up and people start to see him as, well, the opportunist that he is, basically his army collapses. And the big players might be the left Kuomintang, which we've seen just pop up. Now we tag as them. Now I have a sort of series going on as the left Kuomintang on my channel where I explain a lot of shit about them, so I'm not going to really go deep into this. Just know that these guys basically are the stand-in for the Chinese communists. Even though they're the Chinese nationalists, they've been radicalized to the more leftist side of the Chinese nationalist ideology, which was always split between a right wing that was more focused on national issues and a left wing that was comparatively more they were still very focused on the national issues, but they were comparatively more focused on the social and economic aspects of the National Revolutionary Doctrine. And they've been hiding out in the mountains of Fujian for quite a while, which is also incidentally where a bunch of the more left-wing radical KMT supporters were in our timeline, where they had a thing called the Fujian People's Government, where a bunch of nationalist troops in Fujian and nationalist generals revolted against Chiang Kai-shek and Nanjing to sort of ally up with the Soviet, Jiangxi Soviet Republic that the communists had in this area. So you had that this whole region was a hotbed of revolutionaries and guerrillas in our timeline, mostly because of the terrain that we have around here, which is very, very much favorable to guerrilla-style forces. Anyway, basically they also start at war with the Nanjing clique, which after the death of Sun Chuanfang, is led by another one of these warlords called Qi Xie Yuan. And basically, if Qi manages to survive, which is very difficult, very, very difficult, but if he manages to survive, he basically has to focus most of his efforts on making sure that his domain really sort of becomes viable administratively, because before that, well, Sun Chuanfang hadn't done like exactly the greatest job at administering the whole area, so he can't really have like amazing ambitions outside of his own sphere of influence, but he can like do some stuff, but mostly he's gonna be looking to consolidate his influence, and he's very, very much into the German collaboration, because this is near Shanghai, which was the main hub of Western influence anyway in our timeline, and it is still in the Kaiserreich timeline. So this is where all the Western money is coming in from, except Hong Kong. And there's also the ports over here in the north of China under German East Asia, so there's a whole lot of Germans around here. And for example, the Germans trained the army over here, which they did with nationalist China in real life. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff that's going on. Now, the left KMT, on the other hand, are the complete polar opposites, and if they are able to sort of hang on and eventually reach power, they have a bunch of ways in which they can make a great Chinese progressive republic. Now, keep in mind that this just outright KMT insurgency is the left Kuomintang. There are also Kuomintang rightists who exist in Yunnan, who exist in Liangguang, which is the next faction that we take a look at, and who exist in Sichuan. So this is not the only kind of flavor of Chinese nationalist republic that you can have. These are very much the leftists, and they've been, again, radicalized by the years of guerrilla warfare, sort of hounded by the government troops and the imperialists, and most of their leadership had also been in France, a part of them because they had studied in France back in the day, in the 1910s and 20s, and part of it just because they were exiled there. So they're influenced by not just the doctrine of Sun Yat-sen, the sort of father of the Chinese Republic, but also by the French syndicalists. Although not as much as the left, as in practicality, the KMT in real life was influenced by the Bolsheviks, actually. But that's another argument that we don't have time to look at, because how much time have we spent on this? It's way too much already. So let's quickly take a look at the other warlords, so that this video doesn't go too much over the hour. It will probably go over an hour. Anyway, next up we have the Liangguang clique. Now the Hunan clique we won't really go over too much because it's not that important. Just know that Hunan basically, well, in modern Chinese history, Hunan is known as like really the military region, like oh Jesus Christ. Hunan was the province which spawned basically the first real military reformer in modern Chinese history, called Zheng Guofan, who fought against the Taiping Rebellion, which was raging in this area, and was the first real like Chinese military leader of the Qing Empire, like ethnically Chinese, not Manchu or Mongol. And he's a very interesting historical figure that we don't have time to get really deep into, but he's controversial because, you know, he upholds the Chinese Empire under the foreigners, but again, he's like, you know, this great Chinese military man and also kind of philosopher kind of guy. Later on in our timeline, this becomes the province of birth of Mao Zedong and a lot of the leaders, actually, of what will become the Communist Red Army. And so, yeah, that's kind of their shtick. Basically, they're military people, and they're also fiercely sort of independent in their own ways. They're kind of like the Scotland of China, even though that doesn't really like add up. It's like, it's just a, you know, just to give you an idea of how they're perceived. They're also kind of a bit like some southern states in the United States by how they're perceived by other Chinese people. So yeah, that's basically Hunan, but right now their focus tree isn't really all that developed, so we don't really have really much of incentive to look at them in depth. Anyway, Guangdong is a really, really important warlord. Now, Guangdong, actually, it's Liangguang over here. This just means the two Guangs, being Guangdong and Guangxi, because this province is made up of two provinces, or this warlord clique is made up of warlords from two provinces. And their leader is Chen Jiuming, who is this ex-lawyer, absolutely fascinating guy. He had his own political ideology that was very much influenced by anarchism and sort of radical liberalism. And he is the only one of the warlords that had sort of real political legitimacy in a modern sense, in that he was the head of an assembly, essentially, who had to basically get behind a military-style government because that was what was going on in China at the time. You should really pause and read the bio there, because good stuff. So basically, his ideology is federalism, Chinese federalism. Basically, his idea is that while the warlords are causing problems, you can basically entice them to come to your side peacefully. Because he also had this kind of idealistic streak of like every man can sort of be made to understand the greater good or whatever, and yeah, basically negotiate for reunification, which is kind of funny because again, Zhang Zuolin, the epitome of the warlord, you know, the guy who rides around in like this armored up fucking limousine with people with just, you know, crazy hats and Thompsons being bodyguards shooting out of the, you know, of the bulletproof glass, and just sort of acting like an upjumped gangster, has the same sort of conclusion in one of his paths with the Great Reunification Conference. So basically, the whole shtick, so instead of what Feng Tian does, which is like showing everyone their big guns and then saying, okay, now let's talk, what Liang Wang does is they show everyone their great economic success. Basically, the whole idea of Chen Jiuming is we're gonna make Guangdong like a model province. Now, there was a bunch of like model this, model that. It was kind of like a buzzword in China at the time. Like, since everyone was trying to figure out ways to sort of improve the country and modernize the society and the economy, there were a bunch of attempts at like experiments to see which models worked best. And this is something that actually sort of continues all the way up to today with China. They have this sort of weird fixation with prototyping and modeling. Even one of the most famous sayings from the architect of the sort of the great reforms that usher in China as we know it today, the great reforms and opening, Deng Xiaoping, what he said is, okay, we don't know exactly how we're going to carry out this reform program in detail. We just know what we want to achieve generally. And the expression that he used is, we're going to cross the river by feeling out the stones. Another one that he used is, it doesn't matter if the cat is black or white as long as it catches mice. So basically the whole idea is that we need to be pragmatic in the approach to reforming things. And basically, we need to be pragmatic and at the same time sort of promote what works while discarding what doesn't, and then people are going to follow us. So it's this kind of, again, it's kind of this like recurring theme in Chinese history that a bunch of people like to do this. Basically, that's his whole shtick, like federalist model province. And then this will prove that basically his whole program will lead to a better China, and that will convince people to abandon their sort of selfish goals and unite behind him. Of course, this doesn't work out that well, and he is forced to fight as well as talk and negotiate. But you know, his Grand Republican League, Gonghe Datongmeng, is pretty cool. Now, another party that is active there is the Public Interest Party, which is the real party of Chen Jiongming, which is part of the Grand Republican League or whatever. And this Public Interest Party, the Zhongguo Zhugongdang, actually, I need to go on observe mode, is actually one of the legal political parties in China today. It is still around, and they actually had like a minister, like the first minister ever to come from not the Communist Party was from the Public Interest Party, I believe. And they're still very influential in the spheres of especially academia and business. And there goes the left Kuomintang. They got in. Wow. Okay, I almost never see this happen, but apparently Nanjing Click is doing really, really well. Just as I said that it's very, very difficult that Qi does well. But looks like the left Kuomintang just kind of sort of derped. And basically that's that. But they also have the KMT, the Kuomintang. They're represented as radical socialist. Now in Liangwang, under the rulership of Chen, the political system is in actuality a lot more liberal than it seems, and he permits the KMT to operate, although with a legal front called the Productive People's Party. They're more the sort of KMT center left wing. They're not as left as the left KMT insurgents. But they also exist and they can take power. There's also another KMT faction that's actually KMT right-wing, and as you can see, Horseshoe Theory is true because they are the authoritarian Democrats. They're the new Guangxi clique. Now, the people who are in Guangxi right now, which is this province to the west of Guangdong, which is the eastern province, the people who are ruling there are called the old Guangxi clique, who are sort of the Guangxi clique people, the Guangxi warlords who come out of the 1911 revolution. Now, afterwards, both in real life and in Kaiserreich, there is the succession of the new Guangxi clique, who are mainly led by two people called Li Zongren and Bai Chongxi, who instead of being sort of instead of coming from the strain of people from, for example, the Kunming Military Academy, the Yunnan Military Academy, and the generation of the national revolution against the Qing, they are the generation that follows the KMT and the new nationalist ideology. And as you can see over here, since this faction, the Liangguang clique, is basically made up of two different entities, the Guangdong and the Guangxi, every one of these guys have either Guangdong or Guangxi. And whenever these two split up, the different generals go to their respective side. So you gotta be kind of careful with the Guangxi guys if you plan on staying in Guangdong. So that's basically them. Actually, one of their leaders is Ye Jianying, who in real life becomes incredibly important in the People's Republic of China. Basically one of the main people around whom the Cultural Revolution actually revolves around. And who else is pretty important here? Well, obviously Chen Mingshu over here. And Ma Ji is the leader actually of the old Guangxi clique over there, as you can see. Anyway, so if the new Guangxi clique take over, they're the KMT right wing, more connected to the military apparatus, which is basically the most historical path, because in China, in real life, basically the KMT type people that take over are more these guys, and so that's where you have sort of the kind of almost fascist policies of Chiang Kai-shek coming from the more military side of the KMT. Who are known as like the Huangpu clique, because they're coming from the Huangpu Military Academy, which was set up by the KMT to be a sort of both party academy and military academy on Huangpu Island, near Canton. And they're the people who in real life are led by Chiang Kai-shek, who was the dean of the military academy. And in this timeline, Li Zongren, who is one of the most important generals in Chinese, in the modern Chinese history. Now, the other The other Guangxi clique is the old Guangxi clique under Ma Ji, and they can also take over. And there is also another faction called the Merchants Corps, because Guangzhou Canton is one of the more traditionally commercial and sort of internationalized cities in China. And so, obviously, the merchants have their own guilds and self-defense associations, which can also take power and rise up and do their own thing. But the Merchants Corps are much more isolationist. While both of the Guangxi cliques are very militaristic in mind and in practice, the old Guangxi clique more isolationist, while the new Guangxi clique, obviously being KMT, they want to reunify the whole of China under their banner. So that's basically Liangguang. They have a ton of paths, and they have also one of the very, very unique federalist paths. Now, Yunnan is the next one, and Yunnan, we've already sort of gone behind their origins again, sort of coming from the first military cliques that form in the Republican movement in China as a whole. And their original leader is Tang Jiyao, who was one of the main pupils of Cai E, the sort of father of warlordism, kind of, and one of the main leaders behind constitutional protection and anti-monarchist action. And they also have a ton of faction. Now, the thing to know about Yunnan as a province is that it is fucking poor at this moment in history. It's still relatively poor today, but not as much. Now, because of its military role, it had thrust upon it a lot of responsibilities in the first years of the warlord era. And for example, they had troops in Sichuan up north. They had troops in Guizhou, which is this other province over here, which they still occupy in Kaiserreich. And they had troops in Hunan, which is this province over here. And they also had interests in Guangxi. So they had this sort of southwestern Chinese empire that they couldn't really maintain, because the Yunnan army in and of itself, while it was of a superior quality, it wasn't really all that strong in terms of numbers. And Yunnan itself is an incredibly ethnically diverse province. Only about 60% of the people are Han Chinese. In fact, one of the main leaders, military leaders, is part Yi, which is one of these ethnicities, Long Yun over here. In fact, he is kind of sometimes discriminated because he is, again, not entirely Han Chinese. And in Kaiserreich, the reason why Yunnan can hold on a little bit longer than it can in real life to some of its other interests is that basically the troops of the National Revolutionary Army, which is the nationalist army, some of them go to Guangxi, and they're the new Guangxi clique that we talked about already. Some of them run away after the failed northern expedition to the mountains of Yunnan, while a very small number make their way to Sichuan and make up the officers clique, which has taken over. And basically, Yunnan is made up of two broad factions, the Yunnan sort of regionalists and the KMT guys. Now, the Yunnan regionalists at the beginning have Tang as their leader. They basically just want Yunnan to have more of a role inside China, more of a prominence, more of an autonomy. And Tang is a convenient leader for that because he's a crazy ambitious kind of guy. Like, this guy is a motherfucking, backstabber with some real ambition behind him. He even tried to sort of proclaim himself the true leader of China at one point. It's kind of complicated. We don't have time to take a look at that. And basically his whole tree is revolving around like how cool he is. And either he can become like truly, gamer man and seclude himself in his mountains, or he can try to ally up with the Federalists under Chen Jiuming. This is not because he is ideologically a Federalist, although in real life he tried to sort of pass off as that as well. Not because he's ideologically a Federalist, or because he has particularly high ideals, but mostly because, you know, he kind of wants to be independent and have his own domain. And basically that's Yunnan click under Tang. He can also do a real big gamer move and try to restore the Chinese Empire with him as the emperor, which is hilarious because basically you know, like Yunnan was the province where the guy who tried to restore the monarchy, Yuan Shikai, the guy that we talked about at the beginning, found his most like stiff opposition to. So not the smartest move there, buddy. And apparently he calls it the Tang dynasty or whatever. Now Tang, his surname is the same as like an important dynasty in Chinese history, Tang, although it has no relation. So it's also kind of a corny little thing. Anyway, then there's other factions. There's still the New Guangxi clique, but I don't think they played that much of a part there. They're just kind of there because of the proximity. There's the National Foundation Army. Now, another thing that's that we don't have time to take a look at is basically just how much people really liked to call their armies different names, but whatever. Basically, these are the KMT sort of KMT remnants, and yeah, there's also the former NRA. They've got two factions there, representing that they have the both left and right wing of the KMT represented. Then there's this Southwest Industrial Group, and they can't take power. They're under Miao Yintai, who's an economist. And then they also have, obviously, the Kuomintang, the KMT. And yeah, basically the KMT can take over in Yunnan. Now, if Tang, or maybe when Tang fucks up, he basically leaves Yunnan in a state of civil war between a bunch of different actors, and through events you have to pick essentially who's going to win. There's one path for the KMT, I believe one path for the Federalists as well, another path for the Federalists, and also one for Long Yun, again, who is the general that we looked at earlier, one of the main warlords of the Yunnan province, who is, again, kind of interesting because he's also got the ethnic credentials to go behind the sort of regional autonomism, in that he's partially not Chinese. And he's very much less ambitious than Tang, and probably more principled, and more sincere in wanting a you know, more independent Yunnan for the glory of Yunnan rather than, you know, his own big dick. Now, up north is the Sichuan clique, which is a sort of crazy divided place that we don't really want to get too involved in. Just know that, like, in real life, Sichuan was its own military clique, which was incredibly divided again between a bunch of these different warlords that had control of places with basically the populations of European countries. And at one point, the two people that were most powerful in the province were both called Liu. One of them is Liu Wenhui over here, leader of the Baoding in this one. And the other one was Liu Xiang, this one, leader of the Industrial Corps in this one. And they fought a war called the Chu Liu War, where like hundreds of thousands of people were fighting over Sichuan. So this is no joke, you know? But at the same time, Sichuan is seen as kind of like a backwater, because, well, it kind of is. It's like an agrarian paradise with incredibly high fertility, but there's a famine because people cultivate a bunch of opium there, and because it's, well, really, really profitable. And the province is so far inland that it isn't really reached by modernity all that much. And, well, basically the four factions that are fighting here, and as you can see, they've got all the famine relief effort stuff. The four factions that are fighting over here all are pretty radically different. There is the officers department, who are the more progressive officers, the more politically sort of involved kind of people, who can side with the Kuomintang, the KMT, or with the Federalists as well. The Baoding, which is the graduates of the Baoding Military Academy in Beijing, and basically, well, not in Beijing, but you know, in the city of Baoding, which is right near Beijing, and they're basically, you know, sort of the more traditional warlord type people, and they include the Liu Wenhui that we were talking about earlier, a pretty important figure in real life Sichuan history. And as you can see, in this particular game, the Republicans have triumphed, and they're gonna do their own thing. God damn it! I want to click this button. I want to click this button. Whereas that's, as you can see, they're already Federalist aligned. And basically, Sichuan there has another. And the Baoding, by the way, are affiliated with one of the factions in the Qing Empire called also the Baoding clique. While the armaments clique, who are in power in Sichuan at the start, under Yang Sen, are basically the offshoot of the Zhili clique under Wu Peifu. So they're the allies of Beijing, kind of. And there's also the Industrial Corps, which is another one of these armies around here. And I'm not sure why it's called the Industrial Corps, but that sounds pretty awesome. I want to play as them. That's a more traditional warlord faction. And I've never seen their focus tree, actually. Well, I have, but a bunch of time ago, so I don't really remember what they can do. But one other like important characteristic of Sichuan is that it's kind of like the last stand province, and what I mean by that is that they can become the home of like the last stand of a lot of factions. So, like for example, if Chen Jiuming is killed in Liangwang and fails his federalist project there, pro-federalist factions like the officers can take over in Sichuan and invite him over to come and form a government of last stand for the Federalists there. Same thing for the KMT. Same thing for the Qing, for the not for the Qing, for the Zhili, the militarists behind the empire. If they're defeated in the Manchu Restoration, they could run away to Sichuan and sort of make their last stand there and proclaim the five race republic, the 5-color republic. And the Qing themselves, if they're evicted by the Japanese, can run away to Sichuan. This is kind of referencing the fact that in real life, the nationalists, when they were evicted from Nanjing by the Japanese and then from Wuhan, they ran away to Chongqing in Sichuan and continued the fight there. It is sort of the natural redoubt. It's not really that well displayed in Hearts of Iron by the way the map looks, but basically this whole basin over here, this whole Sichuan basin plain inside here, is surrounded by a bunch of really, really difficult to cross mountains. And it's very self-sufficient when it comes to natural resources. So it's kind of a natural base for any would-be, national redoubt from which to come back and retake control of China. Now, the last warlord that I really have time to take a look at, well, just know that these other people exist. Now, Xinjiang clique is basically all about maintaining Chinese rule over one of the most insane provinces in human history, where a bunch of ethnic groups coexist, and which is basically as large as like the German Empire here. And they have free paths, either the Dihua governorship under Jin Shuzhen, who is this guy who is sort of the traditional Chinese rulership model, the proponent of the traditional Chinese rulership model. The Daoyin of Khotan, which is this city down here, which is a more sort of a pro-Islamic government under an Islamic or a Muslim guy called Ma Shao, or the Daoyin of Aksu, who is a social reformist called Sheng Shicai. Now, Aksu is this province here, this city here, And he's got his whole like reformist agenda, and Shen Shucai is also the historical warlord of Xinjiang during the warlord era in our timeline, and he sided with the Soviet Union out of opportunism, and he's kind of a gamer in a way. You should really look up Xinjiang history of the time, because it's absolutely absurd, like just insanely absurd. And obviously the province has a lot to deal with both opium and Russia, because why the hell not? And there's also two other factions that can exist in Xinjiang. The Kumul Khanate, which is a, it's weird. It's a traditional sort of, you could say like, it's a traditional puppet government of this sort of Mongol people that is in this area, that was set up as a vassal state by the Qing when they conquered the region, and kind of remained there for a long, long time until it was abolished at one point. It's a weird-ass thing. Like, the Kumul Khanate is just one of those things where you're like, what the fuck? And again, it survived controlling like this little tiny strip of land in the middle of Central Asia up until like 1920 or something, I don't know. It survived their overlords. And the other state that can rise up is East Turkestan, which right now doesn't seem to exist, unfortunately, which is the ethnic republic of the Uyghurs, who are very, very much, like, I don't think I need to tell you anything about the Uyghurs, considering how much they're being talked about in news today, but basically it's like the Central Asian ethnicity that's the original inhabitants of this area, although that's a weird term. And they can go like radical Islamist and take over, you know, take over Central Asia for them, and go pan-Turanic and kill everyone. Anyway, the other faction is the Sibei San Ma, as they're known in the Free Ma's in the northwest, as they're known in normal Hearts of Iron 4, or Maklik, as they're known here. They have four main generals: Mr. Ma Bufang, Mr. Ma Lin, Mr. Ma Hongbin, and Mr. Ma Hongkui. Now, I've never played these guys, so don't ask me how the fuck you get either of these guys. But this guy is the guy that gets all the memes of like the ice cream. There's a funny meme going around because he's the guy that historically becomes the warlord of the Ma's. Now, if you're asking why Ma, Ma is like a clan name that's very popular in the northwest of China, because it's basically a name that is given by people who are either, well, by ethnically Chinese people who follow Islam, who are known as Hui. Let's see if we can find it anywhere. Yeah, the Hui Islamic identity. Like, the Hui are ethnically a subset of the greater Chinese ethnic group. But again, they have this weirdness of being Muslims and being more influenced by the culture of Central Asia, and that obviously is because the region that they inhabit is more closely linked to the trade routes to Central Asia and the historical routes of travel of Arab and Persian merchants into China. But basically, the reason why there's so many Ma's around here, like for example, as you can see in Xinjiang, the Hui leader is Ma Shawu. Now, he's not a Ma in the same sense as these Ma's. They're a particular clan, but you see a bunch of Ma's because this is supposed to be, like, the surname is Muhammad. So it's kind of the Chinese way of calling someone Muhammad, and so that's why a bunch of families that are prominent in this region are all called Ma's. They're sort of taking out the name of the prophet. And yeah, so basically these guys are not like, you know, jihadists or anything. They're pretty much integrated in traditional Chinese society, and all the focus tree have sort of a balance between the Han and Hui, you know, all this kind of stuff. Their main problem is having to deal with their border disputes with Tibet over Yushu, which is this city, this district that even in real life saw a lot of fighting between... What is that flag? Tibet Improvement Party Social Democrat with a... Is that a sword? Yeah, that must be a dadao, which is a Chinese greatsword with a sickle. I have to play this. Anyway, Tibet basically has a bunch of border conflicts with Sichuan and the Maz, which in real life were pretty much full-on wars. And yeah, so Tibet was supposed to be part of the Chinese Empire, but we just don't have time to look at Tibet. I'm sorry. And Mongolia as well, which is the other part of the greater Chinese Empire that has broken free. Mongolia has 4 paths. The Man, which is what they have right now. The Glorious Man, the People's Party of Mongolia. Who are the people that take over in real life as well and form the Mongolian People's Republic. And... yeah, there's the democratic path. There is the Ungern-Sternberg path, which is what the Mongolians always had in Kaiserreich. There is the Mongolian nobility, and there is the Buddhist Buddhist clergy that can take over. So that's all the factions of Mongolia, and they all basically have pan-nationalist aims to reunite all the Mongols and basically retake like roughly this, you know, retake over roughly this for the glory of Mongolia. Regardless of their ideology. So that's what they're going to do. They're mostly going to go after the Ma clique and Xinjiang clique, and they're going to be incredibly annoying for whatever Chinese faction controls Chahar, which is a region that they claim as part of Greater Mongolia, which today in China, this is Inner Mongolia for a reason, because it's Mongols, although the Mongols are a minority, I believe, today, and even if they aren't, they all speak Chinese anyway, so yeah. Who do we have left? We have the Switzerland of China, Shanxi clique, Yanshishan. Now, Shanxi is a province that is very, very rich in coal and natural resources. And also which has this, see here in Hearts of Iron 4, it's difficult to see because of the way that the tiles work and the provinces work, but like here this is represented by mountains all the way, but actually like this river over here, which is called the Fen River, which divides up the Shanxi province, which is this one, and the Shanxi province, which is this one. Yes, they're pronounced the same, but don't ask me, it's weird. Is actually really, really fertile and holds some of the main, along with Taiyuan, holds some of the main sort of Chinese cities of the ancient Chinese period. For example, Xi'an down here is one of these cities, and this used to be the capital of Imperial China for quite a long time. And near Xi'an also, Luoyang was the capital for a long, long time. So. There we go. There's East Turkestan. So let's check out actually the focus tree down here. They have a path where they can do the realm of the Turks or Islam in one country. That's the gamers, basically. The people who listen to Jihad Nasheeds while they play Hearts of Iron 4 and who play ISIS in the Millennium Dawn modern day mod. Or they have 2 Republican paths, basically. Fun stuff. I'll play them one day. And anyway, the Shanxi clique itself is, however, in a place that's very, very good. Again, it's kind of central to a lot of events in Chinese history, but it's also a pretty good place for isolation because of the position and the way that the mountains shield any persons coming in, which is why the western half of this clique, Shanxi province, which is not Shanxi province, it's Shanxi province, this one with Yan'an, was chosen as the base by the Chinese communists after the Long March, because it's so ridiculously isolated. They were there, they were able to rebuild there and sort of stage the greatest comeback in the history of Dota or history. And basically, the whole shtick of Shanxi clique is that their leader, Yan Xishan, instead of being like this crazy guy with ridiculous aims to, you know, take over China as a whole, basically his main objective is to strengthen his own position in Shanxi and be opportunistic as to what he can do. He's definitely more like the guy who's, you know, waiting to see what happens, and then if things turn out his way, he makes his move. If not, he's content to, you know, fall under someone else and, you know, to save his own skin, just completely not care. However, he does have, like, some interesting aspects about him, in that Yan Xishan is basically like he's the greatest survivor of the warlord era. He is the leader of Shanxi from 1911 all the way to 1949, when his province is taken over by the communists, and basically Yan Xishan, during that whole period, wants to become known as the model governor, and for his province to become known as the model province. Again, this is model stuff. And to strengthen his own position, he also had his own weird ideology called the Yan Xishan Thought, which, perhaps fittingly for the kind of character he was supposed to be the like kind of mega galaxy brain centrist. It was supposed to sort of incorporate the best parts of Bolshevism, nationalism, democracy, and Confucianism. Although his greatest, like, sort of pet peeve was modernization. Like, modernization had to be enforced in Shanxi at all costs, and it actually had, like, a lot of success in industrializing the province and creating a sort of additional power base. Because for now we've been talking about warlords, right? And their power bases were of two kinds, really, in most cases. There were, you know, officers, and there were sort of political reformers who were aligned with the sort of existing power structures, right? Well, political reformers or political not reformers, political figures in general who were aligned with the existing power structures, the existing aristocracy, the existing bureaucracy, the existing landlords. There were also the first elements of, like, what, you know, we'd call the bourgeoisie, right? So obviously people who were trying to harness the new forces of capitalism and capital accumulation and ideology and intellectual theories. And basically one of the places where that developed the most was Shanxi province, because again, like, the government itself favored quite heavily those who, like, for example, learned Western engineering techniques or whatever, and brought them back and, you know, made their own factories with their own money and invested and whatever. And so that's basically Yan Xishan. He's a very, very interesting figure. Now, in real life, he actually at one point almost became the, you know, main leader of China in an event called the Central Plains War, but since the Chinese nationalists don't really exist in Kaiserreich, this is not a thing. This was in 1931, which is basically when, like, all the warlords team up against Chiang Kai-shek. It's a weird thing. Anyway, the Shanxi clique basically survives in this area. However, in Kaiserreich timeline, there is also another faction that exists in Shanxi. As you can see, there's the power struggle over here. Let's see if we have description. There's the Guominjun, which means something like the National People's Army. And well, apparently I'm a dumb. Apparently they translated it too. And the guy is called Feng Yuxiang. Now, Feng Yuxiang can take over in the power struggle through, I believe, various events and the decision system over here, where you can have Feng's coup. And Feng Yuxiang was known as the Christian warlord, because he was Christian, which is, I suppose, a fairly identifying characteristic in warlord China. And he had all these weird practices, like baptizing his soldiers en masse with, like, fire hoses, although that's alleged. And, you know, like fucking giving the Bible to his troops or whatever. So he was also kind of one of these warlords that dabbled in ideology a little bit. In this case, Christian ideology, and their focus tree, the focus tree of the Guominjun in this one has actually like the Christian crusade of Feng to reclaim the Chinese Republic, because this guy Feng, while he was also you know, pretty ruthless, lying bastard, backstabber warlord guy, he was also very much an incensed, like true Republican believer. And in fact, he even at one point basically, you know, became an ally of the Soviet Union too. He was sort of allied to the KMT loosely, and eventually he goes to work for Chiang Kai-shek in real life. The Guominjun is definitely one of the more weird sort of factions within the Chinese warlord era. And yeah, basically playing Shanxi with them is gonna be less about, like, you know, again, opportunistic, nibbling, dabbling everyone else, and more about, you know, just outright going after the Qing for their, you know, pathetic monarchism and their pathetic reactionary ways. And basically, the reason why he's there is that he was fighting, you know, he was fighting in the north of China to make his own power base, and at some point the Qing are restored by the Germans. He tries to fight them and fails, and so he runs away to Shanxi. Now Yan Xishan, being the opportunist that he is, and being like, I'm a galaxy brain centrist, he swears allegiance to Beijing, but takes in his enemies because he's just such a Chad. And because he's such a Chad and the Qing are such virgins, they let him do that. And so they harbor essentially the Guominjun, which is one of the most dangerous armies in China, really. All these troops that you see, most of these troops are Guominjun. Like in real life, Shanxi was never a great military power within China. And yeah, that's basically about it. That's all the warlords, hopefully explained relatively well. I think I'm pretty happy about the lack of sidetracking. Now, it was obviously an hour and a half, but I highly suggest watching this in parts, which, yeah, I said this at the end of the video. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed, have fun, and see you soon.